What is power? The ability to affect change.
There's a construct that comes to my mind, but it probably has more to do with the types of power.
Okay, explain.
I've heard it defined as being there's expert power, coercive power, reward power, basically means of control or influence of other people or an environment.
Okay, so with that definition that you have, is power good or bad?
Neither.
Neither. Why is it neither?
Because it doesn't have within the definition, it's not a positive or negative, it's neutral by those terms. It's the application of power that
Okay.
is allowed to have judgment.
So we're saying that power within itself is neutral, but it's the application, the way that people use it in itself that may be good or bad. Can we all agree on that as a group? Okay. So even though we may agree on that as a group, oftentimes as organizers we have a very murky and uncomfortable relationship with power. Because oftentimes as organizers we may be coming from some type of category in our social identity chart that we talked about before that is oppressed. And so when power comes into our communities, it's in a way that is oppressive. And so even though on an intellectual or social justice way we're like, no, power is neither good or bad. When we step into rooms with people who have power or try to engage with power, we're uncomfortable by it. So that's some of the work that we need to do in order to make sure that when we make effective change, that we're working through these issues of how we ourselves see power and have experienced power. And also, again, going to the organized fish, not replicating those same oppressions that we ourselves have experienced because we don't know any other way to define power. Does that make sense? All right, so when we talk about types of power, what types of power are there?
Political.
There's political power. And give me an example.
President of the United States.
President of the United States. Anyone else? What types of power? Social. How? More?
Well, I think of celebrities and people who are not necessarily in politics, but they still have a lot of influence. And
Well, that's the exact word I was looking for.
influence.
Influence. And so you guys actually use the two different example definitions that we have. One is legitimate power. So an example that we can have is like the President of the United States. So he is in charge of he was voted in and is in charge of something very specific that has laws, is related to Congress, all these things, right? It's an institution of legitimate power. Another way to look at power is influence. And so oftentimes we think about the secretary of the president if you want to get a meeting, right? So maybe that person in themselves doesn't have a lot of legitimate power within an institution because of the way we see secretaries, right? Which is not right necessarily. But if you need to get a meeting, you might want to bring that person some coffee every day, all right, and ask them how their children are, or know those things about, because that person has influence. Because what power is access in order to make change, right? And so who has the access that you need in order to make change? And we have to take ourselves away from only seeing this in terms of legitimate power, because oftentimes we don't have access to those people. It's the person who's going to help you get what you need in your campaign or your community organizing. And so it may not be the president, it may be the CFO, the head, the person who's in charge of the money in some type of way, of the resources, because you need to get that information. And we go automatically to the president, who may be a figurehead, or may not know all the details that you need to know, right? So, does that make sense to people? Mm-hmm. All right, so we have influence and we have legitimate power, both serving their place when we're thinking about these types of things. Any questions on this? So my next question is, how do I identify power? And I already kind of said it. Based on the source?
Yeah, so legitimate power, the source of that power is that your voters voting for you, and it's within an institution. Economic power, the source of the power is the money, and influence, the source of the power is your cultural presence.
Okay, so I want to break that down a little bit more. Let's think about Ferguson. And the mayor, I believe it was last week, said, you can't blame me for not knowing about an email that was sent because I get paid. I'm a part-time mayor He was voted in. I'm a part-time mayor, but I only work for like $350 a month. That's what he said, something like that. He gets paid less than that. And the real people who have power are the people who are not voted in. So we have someone who has legitimate power technically, but does not have access to the resources that is needed. So the way that we identify who has power is a person who has access to the resources. And I think it was the city controller who actually has power because he's the person who determines who gets vote or who gets paid, the emails, things like that. He was the person who's in charge of that, not even the mayor. And we usually understand mayors to have a lot of power in cities, right? So that's why we need to separate. So it's people who have access to the power that you need. And it's also people who have access to authority, but also social identity is really important because the fact of the matter is if a man was giving this presentation, studies show that you guys would listen more, right? I'm not saying that's right, but what I'm saying is social power affects as well, whether it's right or wrong. And so how do we break down those things and understand those things as well?